Hey there, welcome to this week's episode of Normal Men. This is Go Like Hell Machine from Portland, Oregon, and I'm taking a break from Normal Men for a little bit. But I'm leaving you in very capable hands.
Hi, hello, hi. I'm Ed. I'm from, I guess you could, oh no, I'm the guy from Maine, aren't I? I was going to say I'm from Boston, but I'm not, so that's a lie. And someone on the internet will know. But hi, hello. Thank you, Go Like Hell Machine. It's weird calling you that, but we're going to keep up the facade. Yeah, glad to be here. It'll be fun.
Clean on OPSEC.
And just so everyone is aware, any audio issues of any kind, any bad mics, any bad editing, it's all 100% Ed's fault from here. Do not bring me any problems with this on Blue Sky. I don't want to hear it because it's 100% Ed. I have nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I feel like you were changing the terms of this deal.
Yeah, it's not.
We'll talk about that in private.
I mean, come on, like 99% of our mic problems are George's bizarre mic that picks up every time he touches it.
Yeah, that microphone is legit known for making the most noise ever when you think about it. But for the price, you can't beat it.
He has promised to send me a loot box, which is nice. I don't know if he's actually going to follow through or if that was just a way to get onto the podcast, but he did promise that. So hopefully my mic will improve at some point thanks to our new co-host.
Yeah, I'll just go through 10 years of bad purchases and regrets and find something.
I will remember you.
Grunk will remember you.
All right, now that he's gone, that guy.
Welcome to Normal Men, a podcast from four men who are clinging desperately to normalcy in an era when normalcy is impossible to find. We talk about what's happening, explain some of it, and joke with each other in order to stay sane. I'm George in Charlotte.
I'm Proctor Malone from the District of Columbia.
I'm low-tax speedrun enjoyer in outer Florida.
I'm Go Like Hell Machine in Antifa-controlled Portland.
Yeah, we can't abide him. That's why we kicked him out and are not desperately missing his various contributions, which include the wonderful website for the podcast, among other things. It's really sad to lose a normal man, but we've also gained a normal man, and here we are, a quartet of normal men who get to talk about a new war. Spectacular. In case you have been living under a rock, we have bombed Iran this weekend. Last week, the president said he would make a decision at some point over the next 2 weeks, and the decision had apparently been made, I think, shortly thereafter to actually launch the B-2 bombers that ended up delivering massive ordnance penetrators to a couple different Iranian nuclear facilities. We are still not sure what the effects of those strikes were in terms of hurting their ability to enrich uranium or produce a nuclear weapon. There was damage done, that much is clear. Whether there was actually anything or anyone at those facilities that was damaged or not is an open question. And I think that is where I'll leave it and throw off to the rest of the normal men to talk about where we're at here.
Yeah, the physical issue here is that these centrifuge facilities are buried under mountains. These are very much hardened facilities, and they're under, depending on which of the facilities we're talking about, something like 30 feet of concrete, or again, a literal mountain. So there are real questions as to how far our bunker busters penetrated and how much damage was done to the working guts of the facilities. But the imaging we have indicates that at least the entrances took a fair amount of damage. So at minimum, it's going to take some digging out to get back to the point where the Iranian nuclear program can access whatever they were doing in these facilities. The question, I think, on everybody's mind is what happens next. Are we looking at retaliation from Iran? Are we looking at something that doesn't quite rise to the level of retaliation, but is otherwise a pain in the butt for the United States or for the world? What happens with Iran's various proxies? What is this going to do economically, and what is this going to do militarily? There's a lot of question marks in all of these areas. I guess maybe the place to start is militarily, since the ostensible purpose of this strike was to cut down on Iran's nuclear breakout time. Was to expand Iran's nuclear breakout time, so it's going to take them longer to get to the point where they can enrich uranium to a high enough level that they can make a nuclear weapon. At least as of this recording, which is on Sunday night, the day after the strikes, we don't know where the enriched uranium is. There is some evidence that there were trucks, despite all the "we'll make a decision in 2 weeks," despite all the, in theory, surprise attackness of dropping these bunker busters. There was some amount of transit from the sites prior to the strikes. And that may mean that the uranium is somewhere else in Iran, and we don't know where it is. That's maybe not a great scenario if your major concern is damage from nuclear weaponry, because that's pretty highly enriched uranium. I think they've got it at about 60%. That would not take all that long to turn into a nuclear weapon, and is potentially usable as a dirty bomb besides.
Yeah, in terms of response, you've got the traditional military response, and we're going to talk about the vulnerabilities of the global oil market. We talked about it last week, but we're going to talk about it more tonight. You've got the question of, can they create a fission device? And then you've got the general risks of a bunch of uranium floating around. You do not need a lot of technology to create a dirty bomb. Basically, all you need is some enriched uranium. And when we say dirty bomb, we mean a traditional explosive with a bunch of radioactive material attached to it. In this case, uranium. The risk is that one of the ways Iran responds is by strapping a bunch of enriched uranium to a conventional device and getting it into either Israel, the United States, maybe somewhere else, and detonating it as a response. That's like the sort of biggest, most nasty asymmetric response. There are others, terrorism, stochastic terrorism of other kinds that don't involve radioactive materials. There's also the conventional military response, and then there's the fission path. And they're all dealing with different capabilities and probabilities that and different incentives for the Iranian leadership that I think mean it's going to be a little bit tricky ruling out the worst case scenarios in coming weeks. But that doesn't mean that those scenarios are particularly likely or let alone highly likely.
For those of you who were of age during the Second Gulf War, some of this may sound very familiar because it's basically the same problems that we're encountering here. One of the big concerns during the Second Gulf War period was that there would be weapons of mass destruction that were loose in Iraq somehow, that there would be biological weapons or chemical weapons or nuclear weapons or material that was not itself a weapon but that could be weaponized, that was running around in the country that could fall into the hands of a non-state actor who might do damage with it. And I think that that's also a concern here in Iran, that it's not exclusively the nation that we need to worry about here, that there is verifiably dangerous material that at least publicly we no longer know where it is. And if that falls into the hands of somebody who wants to use it to do damage, it could do a lot of damage. So that's going to be advanced as an additional reason to press the offensive here, whether it's militarily, and as we all remember from Iraq, you can spend a long time in a big country looking for weapons that may or may not exist without finding anything useful. Whether it's diplomatically, where we're trying to get the nation of Iran to regulate these stockpiles that we just tried to blow up. So far, there is no radiation signature that's radiated out from the strike sites, which probably indicates that we did not hit the uranium. That's a good thing, and that's a bad thing, right? I mean, it's a good thing in that we're not dispersing clouds of radioactive dust all over Iran. It leaves open the possibility that this was a strike that did limited damage to a narrow objective and isn't going to cause a lot of collateral damage down the road. But it also means, again, that we don't know where this stuff is.
I mean, I take your point on that, but like there's a certain commonality here with everything else that's going on, and that's that this is going to be a technical term. I apologize. These people are clown shoes morons. And the assumption that like that this administration can I mean, could they run a lemonade stand without lighting it on fire? And I don't think we should be assuming that these strikes did much, right? Like, it's certainly possible that they have, but it's really telling that, you know, Hegseth and his shellacked hair are out there day one screaming about how effective this was, how amazing this was. And then, you know, like the Pentagon's out there saying BDAs aren't done, right? Like assessments aren't done. So that kind of makes one wonder about exactly if they're that worried it was effective at all, because I mean, they're nihilists, right? Like they're not going to care, except insofar as maybe they can use it for the next thing. And I think that's kind of maybe the thing we as Americans should be maybe thinking about right now is turns out how dare they get bombed by us is very much in line with the way that some of these folks would make excuses for going and doing something a lot more drastic.
And also looks unlikely to work in terms of public opinion. The way that these guys are talking on the Sunday shows is just wildly unpalatable. JD Vance justifying a complete pivot by saying, well, it's different this time because we don't have a dumb president anymore. The prior presidents were all dumb, and that's why it was a bad idea then, but it's a good idea now. Nobody is going to look at that and be highly convicted that that's a good call. You'll see the relative unpopularity of a strike against Iran. Polling we had late last week for a U.S. strike against Iran, not an invasion, just a military strike, was roughly 2-1 opposed. Roughly. I mean, these things have error bars, but I think you had roughly 2-1 in favor among Republicans, 80-20 or 90-10, something like that, and against for Democrats, and I think something like 80-20 against for independents. And you're not going to move those needles. You'll move the Republican needle to 100% just by doing it. You're not going to move the other needles by making the argument that, well, this time it's going to work because we're not stupid, when everything you do makes you look stupid, Mr. Breakfast Gin. And
how much of this, I've wondered, because apparently we were in communications with Iran ahead of the strike, and trying to assure them we're not after regime change. We're just doing this and then we're done. How much of this, and we've telegraphed this whole thing the whole way. The Iranians knew something was coming. Like how much of this, when we think about the strikes, what damage they may have done, and the response that Iran may engage in, like how much of this is, I don't know if kabuki theater is the right term.
Kayfabe.
But kayfabe, something along those lines.
You know, it's been clear that there's been a fairly productive back channel between the United States and Iran with regard to Israeli action in recent months. And it's entirely possible that these conversations are happening. One thing that I think has gotten a little bit underplayed so far is that while the idea of these strikes was to remove an Iranian capability to take their centrifuges offline so that they could no longer enrich uranium, we've also kind of removed an American capability here. The bunker busters that we used 14 of them. We only had 20 of those. And it's not clear that we can just go whip up another 20 of them. These are very, very specialized bombs that were designed for essentially bombing these particular facilities. And if they didn't work the way that we wanted them to work, we're not going to get another bite at that apple anytime real soon. Not just logistically or operationally, but because we're out of bullets.
To add to that observation, there's a really interesting thing that's gone on since the start of the war, or re-acceleration of the war in Ukraine, where Western countries with advanced military capabilities, and not just the United States, other Western countries as well, France, the UK, have basically run out of stuff that they can send Ukraine. Not entirely run out as in we can't send them anything, but there's not a ton of extra ordnance lying around. And I don't just mean ammunition, I mean tanks, I mean aircraft. There is not a huge amount of this stuff in the world that is in good shape to fight.
Oh, the Europeans ran out of weapons again? What a shock.
It's not just the Europeans, it's everybody.
Yeah,
Russia's had problems with this too, right? There is a serious lack of productive capacity related to producing weapons in the world, which is an insane thing to say from a moral perspective, right? Like from my perspective, my ethics and politics would say the productive capacity of weapons in the world should be real close to zero. Like we shouldn't have a lot of that, ideally. And that should be what we were working towards. So I'm not out here being like, we need to build more guns and bombs factories. I'm not saying that, but the reality is there is a lot less ability to produce weapons, especially quickly and especially really advanced weapons. There was really good Wall Street Journal reporting last week talking about the relative lack of interceptors that Israel has to knock down ballistic missiles inbound from Iran. And they only have so many of these interceptors, and the U.S. only has so many interceptors on at its military facilities in the region and on its naval vessels. So you burn through them eventually against a much lower tech but easier to construct weapon. That being the ballistic missile and drone arsenal of Iran. There is nothing lower tech than a big old pile of concrete. And it appears to have been a lot more effective against a very large and expensive and very low count weapon system than was previously thought.
Yeah, and the thing that jumps out, and it's not just the very expensive, very advanced weapons, like no one can make enough shells to keep Ukraine occupied. But the thing that keeps jumping out at me when looking at the coverage is the way that like the blithe assumption that this worked on like TV is really unsettling. Like, I know I'm going back to that, but like, I actually didn't realize that we had so few of those deep penetrating bombs. And if we only have one bite at that apple, the worst people in the world are the ones who are in charge of that right now. So like, step two, and obviously no one public is going to really know this, right? But like, what the next step is going to be is probably going to be something we can't see, right? Like it's going to have to be done out of band, not just because of us, right? Or because of us as in like the public, but like us as in, can they trust Donald Trump not to tweet it out? And that's going to put any of these conversations, because it does seem like we've still had very high bandwidth conversations. It's just how are we supposed to go forward when the next step is True Social? Is a really weird thing for folks to be navigating.
I mean, Donald Trump would never tweet anything out. I mean,
you're right. I stand corrected.
That is actually why I'm convinced we've never made contact with aliens. That there's nothing hidden, because he asked as soon as he was sworn in 2017. He asked, like, where are the aliens? I want to see the aliens very strongly.
Yeah, there was a fun half hour last night in between the Trump tweet, I'm not going to call it a truth, and media confirmation that these strikes had in fact taken place, where I was genuinely unsure whether or not we'd actually done the thing, or if Trump had just tweeted about us doing the thing, possibly prematurely. And that's kind of the environment that we're living in right now, is that there's an inner loop that is obviously moving faster than kind of the outer media loop in terms of information. And normally that's a good thing for these kinds of intricate plans. But in this case, the people involved in the inner loop are unstable and incompetent. And that means that you sometimes get these emanations from what should be the seat of the good information that are anything but, that are either flatly wrong, are intentionally misinforming people, or that are themselves misinformed.
They have other good qualities too.
One of the major questions from here is how Iran's various proxies react to Iran coming under direct attack from the United States. One of the things that I'm maybe naively concerned about here is that down in Yemen, the Houthis say that they're back off the ceasefire plan with the United States. And that, in the fairly recent past, has been a major issue for Suez shipping. I don't know whether it's going to resume being a major issue or whether that's something where they're still going to be fairly limited in their strikes only against U.S. flagged vessels, in which case it wouldn't be as big a deal.
Just one more thing to the pile to think about in terms of disruption of global value chains, whether it's U.S. tariffs, potentially having the Strait of Hormuz closed, which, again, we talked about last week. It's the narrow strip of water that separates Oman from Iran and hosts about a quarter of global oil flows, including 90% of the crude that Iran exports that goes to China and large volumes of other crude that goes to China, which is why China has not really said much. They've said, these strikes were illegal, but that's been about it. They haven't come to bail out the Iranian regime at all. There's also Yemen. If you can't ship through the Suez Canal, you can still get goods from East Asia to Europe. It just takes a lot longer and it's a lot more expensive. Anything that takes longer is by definition more expensive. You're also dealing with massive trade uncertainty related to tariffs. So you're seeing this large series of shocks hit the global production system that we haven't seen since 2020, 2021, when the combination of responses to COVID and huge swings in consumer demand really messed up a bunch of stuff. It doesn't look like right now these disruptions are going to be as bad as that. But if you look at what happened to global inflation after that episode, it wouldn't have to be anywhere near as bad to have a pretty material impact in terms of inflation. And that dynamic is going to be one to watch in coming months because we still haven't felt in domestic US consumer prices anything from the tariffs. It's not there in the data as having a big impact yet. It will have an impact. It's just not there yet. So the as Proctor said, the inside track for information is moving much faster than the public track for information, but the inside track for feedback loops is also moving much faster than the actual feedback loop on the outside that is visible to the world. And those feedbacks will come home to roost both domestically and around the world in economic terms.
George, is there something of a multiplier effect there? If you have to go the long way around rather than through the shorter canal, and that means longer shipping times, that's maybe not that big a deal if you have very consistent demand and you can just space things out to 8 weeks instead of 4 weeks or whatever it is. But if you have things that are changing rapidly in the commercial environment, such as tariffs, such as major variability in demand, doesn't that additional lead time kind of build on itself and make it much harder to do the sort of just-in-time things that our supply chains have become very used to doing?
I think you could make that argument. I wouldn't necessarily say that definitively just because there are so many moving pieces and puts and takes in terms of what demand is doing. I mean, keep in mind, European manufacturers, for instance, are likely staring down the barrel of a pretty big drop in demand from the US. Autos is the best example of this, but it will happen in other places as well. And demand is going to be falling as supply falls as well. I mean, the way to think about this is the supply curve shifts, right? That's essentially what closing the Red Sea to friendly shipping does. You have demand falling at the same time. It's not super clear. What is clear is that, again, when we talked about tariffs a lot earlier this year, you're whacking a very large and complicated machine very hard at a couple different key points. And maybe it's built strong enough that there's enough slack in the machine that other gears take over and it's not a huge deal. If they don't, then you get a lot of inflation. And I think there's a good case to be made that we're looking at that latter outcome just because the whack is so hard. Now, if Iran doesn't close the Strait of Hormuz or if there isn't enough uncertainty around what happens in the Strait of Hormuz that shipping can continue using it, because we've already seen a pretty large decline in the volume of oil tankers that are moving through, oil and natural gas tankers that are moving through those waters. If that doesn't continue, then I think there's a pretty viable way out of this, just based on all the puts and takes. But if you suddenly see, on top of the Red Sea logistics disruption, on top of the tariffs, on top of all that and all the other geopolitical uncertainty, et cetera, now oil goes to $100, $120 a barrel, which I think is probably a realistic outcome if Hormuz really closes for longer than like a week. Then yeah. Now, I think this is a good jumping off point to talk about what Iran is capable of in conventional terms at this point. We talked earlier about some of the concerns from unconventional stuff. Conventionally, they are still fighting Israel. They are still lobbing ballistic missiles and drones at Israel. It's not really working. They're landing some in Israel, and there have been casualties inside Israel. Nothing as big as what they're lobbing at them. It's roughly a 90% takedown rate from Israel's defense systems, and the United States helping them as well some other countries.
It's a little tricky to find some of this stuff. I was looking earlier, but like Iran, for those who don't know, has two of almost everything in terms of governmental structures because of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So they have the Iranian Navy, but the IRGC also has naval assets. But I'm pretty sure they have they can do a lot in terms of assets that are not necessarily super useful for attacking or defending against Israel, right? Like their Navy isn't going to be doing very much against Israel. So the fact that I believe they have a couple of submarines, and they can mine the strait, and they can keep it that way pretty much indefinitely, as far as I understand, unless somebody goes and exerts a lot of effort to pry them out. So it kind of comes down to
paraphrase my old football coach, indefinitely is a long time.
True. But pick the option, right? Like who's going to go in and do something about it? Because if the United States is involved, they're probably going to be involved in like an aerial form, I would assume. I hope. I guess that's topic 2, isn't it? The end game for when that turns back on, to some extent, is also really unknown, and that has ripple effects on everything else, right? Like how do you assume a time horizon for a lot of this stuff if the party that gets to make that decision is effectively opaque?
And particularly if you're talking about something like mining the strait, that's not an easy decision to unwind. Once you've put things out there, you're going to have to clean them out before commercial traffic can resume in earnest, because you're going to have a pretty big problem if tankers start hitting mines in that strait.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to do that unless they believe that we're really serious about regime change.
Definitely.
They may shut down the strait in other ways, but I mean, doing something that would become a longer term project to unwind is something that I think that's a desperation maneuver. I think that I don't think we're there yet with Iran. Same thing with the idea of Iran, detonating a dirty bomb or something in Israel or the States. I don't think they're going to do that unless the fall of the regime is imminent in their view. That's not to say they may genuinely be nuts. I don't know.
I don't think we have any indication of that, for what it's worth. I just looking at how they've behaved, I think that's one thing we can pretty much rule out. The U.S. leadership is nuts. I don't think they are.
Yeah, they get stuff wrong in war and intelligence and stuff, and we've seen them do so pretty spectacularly in this war so far. But Iran, historically at least, has tended to be a fairly rational actor, I think.
And for all you EV fans out there, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, congratulations, you have your lottery ticket.
That's one of the greatest 2-tweet series I have ever seen. It's just magnificent. I was legitimately crying for like a half an hour reading that.
We are referring to a very interesting concept that is important for understanding how this strike on Iran is looking like it might play in the domestic U.S. political environment. We'll come back later to how Democrats are responding. TLDR, not great, not as good as they could be, but they are also playing on a very tilted field. And I think the Glonzo concept is very helpful for understanding this. So low tax. Who's Glonzo?
So Glonzo is a creature who was made up by a guy we all follow on Blue Sky named William B. Fuckley, who was talking about how to communicate with really stupid voters. And he said, if 25% of the population believed a creature called Glonzo caused high power prices by chewing through transmission lines, any competent politician would be negligent in not trying to find a way to exploit this. That doesn't mean that these people wouldn't be fucking morons. And then William follows that up by saying, Trump has a natural advantage with these voters over people who give a shit about policy or reality, because we'll mumble something about hardening electrical infrastructure while trying to hide our contempt, while he'll say that the Marines will kill Glonzo under him.
Wasn't this like during that weird drone scare?
Yeah, this was during the great UFO panic of December 2024, when the Eastern Seaboard became convinced that
it was New Jersey. It was not the Eastern Seaboard. As an Eastern Seaboard resident, come on, it was New Jersey.
It was New England.
New Jersey discovered the concept of perspective and freaked out.
Yeah, let's not put this on Delaware or even New York, and certainly not us in the South or folks like Ed in New England.
No, I got bad news for you, dude. It was a thing up here. I regret my choices.
All right. Well, I'm not fully willing to absolve Delaware on this one, but I think that it's true that it was mostly concentrated around Jersey, where you had people who were seeing what we are both now and then pretty sure were airplane lights, and thinking that they were aliens doing some kind of advanced terror planning or surveillance or science, or maybe invaders. Anyway, something that was out of the ordinary. And this got a lot of pickup all the way up to, the mainstream media level, where New York Times was running articles about it. I think Chuck Schumer had to come out with a vaguely conciliatory statement about how, we have to be careful about the maybe UFOs. There's sort of an analogous phenomenon to that existed in the social media sphere last year that's had a very recent uptick, which is this kind of crazy notion that the military draft is in imminent danger of being reinstated. When this came up during campaign season, this was an attack on Democrats. The memes were that, warmonger Kamala Harris is going to start a new war in the Middle East and draft all of us. And people actually believed this. I don't think there was a whole lot of evidence behind that at any point. Harris had been part of the only administration in my adult lifetime to get us out of a war in the Middle East. There was no indication that Harris particularly wanted to go to war in the Middle East, and certainly no indication that we would be doing anything along the lines with a non-volunteer military force. Even if we did, we have no particular need for draft-type manpower at this time. But it was something that resonated with people. It's something that it sounds like people are bringing up again to politicians, to media, on social media, in light of the renewed salience of the possibility of a war in the Middle East.
This is especially rife on TikTok based on the comment screenshots I've seen floating around, but it's a real world phenomenon too, I think, for a specific subset. I think when we're talking about these sorts of things, we need to be careful to not over extrapolate and just assume that because it's happening in some comment sections on TikTok, it's rife in every group chat among young men aged 18 to 25 across the nation. I don't think it's anything like that, but it is a real thing to a point. And it really speaks to how completely broken our information environment is, where whether it's a drone in New Jersey or a draft fear in response to the Iran stuff, we are just completely separated from material reality. There's just no conceivable way to worry about that specific outcome, let alone pin it on a political party that is in opposition to the people with agency at that point. I don't understand what's going on with it. And I think there's a ton of hand wringing about young men. How do we reach young men? How do we do this? How do we do that? It's because not that messages can't be sent to young men. It's because there's a certain subset of young men who just, it doesn't matter what message you send them. They're thinking Glonzo, and it literally doesn't matter what the reality is. They're inside a distortion field too powerful.
I'm going to choose to believe that it is representative of all young Zoomer men, first of all, and that like, sorry, y'all are going to wear that one, and that it's true. Yes, Donald Trump is going to like, y'all have those ancient Sparta profile pictures on all your shit on these sites, and now Donald Trump, in his great war of liberation of the Iranian people, is going to send all y'all off to fight this. So you're gonna get the genuine Sparta experience, and by that I mean getting your head kicked in by a bunch of Iranians.
I'll take the devil's advocate side of this a little bit. I think that we're in a world now, and have been really. I think Doge was really the point where this became fully real to me under the second Trump administration. So very early on, where the notion that something is obviously stupid and counterproductive is no longer a sufficient rebuttal to say, well, then they're not going to do it. Do I think it's likely that we have a draft? No, I don't think it's likely that we have a draft. There would have to be a lot of things that go wrong in very specific ways from here to get us to the point where we're mandating military service for young men. But I don't think it's entirely off the table, and I think it's materially less off the table than it was 2 days ago. So, even though these are mostly empty fears, there's a difference between a mostly empty fear and a totally empty fear. The UFOs are a totally empty fear, but being worried you're going to get hit by a car, that's not a totally empty fear. You're not likely to get hit by a car, but people do. You're not likely to, have brain-eating amoebas kill you because you used your neti pot, but that's a thing that happens.
Or swam in a southern lake, as I did this afternoon. And let me tell you, I did think about that when I got some water up my nose at one point.
Ooh. I mean, okay, I hear what you're saying, but like, this is lightning strikes you 3 times type of stuff, right? Like, the information environment is so trashed, and the screenshots you see floating around, because who's on Twitter anymore? Too many people, but anyway, it's the same tired morons from the Atlantic, right? Like, it's the same useless, theoretically professor guys. Although, strangely enough, they seem to have been on a leave for a very long time. I wonder if they're ever going back. Whoops, did I just say that out loud? Anyway, but like the people that are saying this are so hilariously incredible, and that's kind of itself a commentary on what we're dealing with, because I tend to look at these sorts of things because in my day job, right? Like I spend a lot of time. I'm a software architect. I spend a lot of time looking at different systems and going, okay, how can this lie to me and how can this break? And in so doing, like, you start seeing, okay, this one can break, And then the cone starts growing outward from there, right? Because of the level of uncertainty across the board. And where's that uncertainty starting? Well, it's starting with the disinformation artists in the White House, right? And then the influencer types, if you ask them, I am sure they do not believe that there's going to be a draft. But you can say anything you want now. It's fine. There's no penalty for being wrong. And there's also like not really any benefit from being right, except you got a bunch of clicks. And that's a really bad situation to be in. And like, that's honestly going back, taking the long way around back to what we were originally talking about. That's the sort of thing that I would like to start seeing politicians actually key on. Right? Like, and then figure out how to fix the environment when we actually have power.
No, I'm saying the only way to stop a bad guy with misinformation is a good guy with misinformation.
No, please don't. Please don't.
If you are not making stuff up to make Republicans look bad and posting it on TikTok or Instagram Reels, targeting an exclusively under age 30 male audience, you simply are not engaged in praxis, my friend. There's nothing else to say about it.
Do you have to make it up? The truth is bad enough.
You do have to make it up. No, that's
Okay.
the rules. We're not Stancil out here. We're making stuff up now. No, I mean,
but this is, I mean, it's as Proctor said, the probability is very low here, but it's not zero. So it's not technically a lie to try to scare the shit out of the kids.
No, I mean, I think fear mongering is the technical term here. That this is something where the perceived risk from a very, very remote chance of a very bad thing happening is overestimated, and that's a well-known, well-defined psychological phenomenon that happens in lots of different arenas, to lots of different people under lots of different circumstances.
I mean, you're not wrong, but one thing we keep talking about this as if it's real. I have a feeling we're going to find out in 5 days that, oh no one thinks that we're going to have a draft, because they don't think that about Republicans, right? Like this is a random stick that is used to beat Democrats, right? Like the people who are involved, like they're fascists. Come on, they don't believe things. They go ahead and say X when X is suitable to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to believe it 5 minutes later. And I think that's honestly probably what we're dealing with here. We're probably all getting washed, is what I'm saying.
Are the people receiving the message the fascists, or are the people sending the message the fascists? Because the problem is the people receiving the message, right? Fascists are going to try and do what they're going to try and do. Right. How do you drown those voices out, or how do you counteract those voices in terms of who's hearing the message? You would have a really hard time convincing me, no matter how much negative stuff you trotted out.
The way you do it is you send grok after them, apparently.
Liberalism's strongest soldier. You would have a really hard time convincing me that every under 30 dude in this country is a fascist. I don't
know, but a lot of them are certainly fascist receptive.
Right. And that gets to what I'm saying, right? How do you deal with people who are fascist receptive as opposed to actual fascists? I think, is it a different problem, or is it the same problem? I don't know. That's the question.
I don't think anyone alive knows. Meanwhile, we've got Proctor over here gesticulating wildly into a muted microphone.
Sorry, I think it's a different way to attack the same problem, right? I think it's the problem we're actually trying to solve for here is that we want to marginalize fascists. We don't want fascists in control of our politics. We don't want fascists in control of our industry. We don't want fascists in control. One way you can do that is by making fascism entirely unpalatable. You can do that through legislation. That's the core of the German approach these days. You can do that through ridicule, through the various processes by which fringe groups get marginalized. That's a perfectly good way to do it. You can do that by not allowing them to unite, so the factional infighting holds them down. That's essentially how we did it in this country for a long time. That the fascists couldn't get on the same page with each other, and so we didn't have a functional fascist movement in this country, and it was very nice. Trump has cut through some of that. We can no longer say that fascism is a marginalized position in America because they're in the White House. It's clear that there's a path to power that runs through right-wing reactionary thought that gets you right there to the big levers. So now we're talking about how to do PR to the next generation rather than just make it clear that this is a path that if you go down, it's material suicide. It's career suicide. You're going to eliminate your own prospects. You're not going to be able to accomplish any of the things that you may be deluded enough to think are good to accomplish, that it's a dead end. That part's no longer true. So now we have to figure out how to get the marginally attached people, as George said, to stay away. People who, they're not necessarily opposed to fascism. They're not necessarily fascists. It's within the range. They don't want to think too hard about it. That's fine. You can build a pretty good nation out of people who don't want to think too hard about things, as long as the fascists don't get the whip hand. But as soon as you have fascists in the corridors of power, you actually do need to do something to pry people who do not want to interrogate this deeply away from the movement. I think that ultimately that's going to turn on essentially fascism being seen as uncool. One of the mistakes that I think we've made is we have somehow allowed authoritarians to also take the position of being rebels. That you have people who believe in these top-down hierarchical structures who, at the same time, are able to present themselves as being, the lone voice in the wilderness crying out for sanity. They're not. They're the lone voice in the wilderness that is completely nuts, but they are able to present themselves as in opposition to a calcified power structure, to the gerontocracy, to the old, to your parents' and your grandparents' way of doing things. And that's a dangerous combination when you have both the appeal of novelty and rebellion and the kinds of reactionary modes of thinking and power structures that the fascists in America would like to set in stone.
That's a lot of words to not have an answer.
I think back to that. I think it was New Yorker piece in February of this year, maybe, or March, where they profiled all the hot young Republicans and very, very intentionally framed it as here are where all the hot people are and what they're doing. Now, the sort of people that we're talking about reaching here, the marginally attached or fascist receptive type people, are not reading the New Yorker. They're not reading legacy, highbrow public media. That's not where they're getting their information from. That's not it. So I hesitate to pin this on that specific viewpoint or that specific channel of distributing information. I think you can see an analogous thing where people get really mad at New York Times headlines, rightfully so, without a discussion of who is actually reading these headlines. The people who are reading the headlines are not the marginally attached people. Mm-hmm. The people who are reading the New York Times piece or the New Yorker piece or whatever are not the marginally attached people. But it is creating a culture of acceptance for whitewashing fascism among elites. And I think that's where getting mad at the New York Times, as my pal Michael Tay Sweeney is so legendarily good at, and I spend quite a lot of energy as well, is actually useful because you are disciplining what is acceptable for elites to say. That's true on stuff like trans rights. That's true on stuff like acceptance of fascism. That's true on a wide range of different points of view. The way the attack on Iran is being covered is a great example of it. It is worthwhile to attach a social cost among elites to fascist ideas. That's worthwhile. It's not the whole ballgame, but it's one way you can do that. And I can say personally, I have no compunction about holding someone accountable for the project they're engaged in, even if they're doing it incidental to the actual project of fascism.
Also, on a side note, along with the Glonzo tweets from William, Michael Tay Sweeney also has my other favorite tweet about the median voter, who he has commented believes that the NFL commissioner is a cabinet appointment.
Now, should they be? That's a different question.
Only if my guy's in office. I mean, just like any other appointment.
Could have had Condoleezza Rice.
Oh God.
I like how that one took a second. The implications had to sink in. And then Lotex just explodes. Art is what I'm saying.
How many rings would the Cowboys have at this point if Condoleezza Rice had been the NFL commissioner at some point?
I'm pretty sure we would have had a full nuclear exchange by now, and it would be a moot question.
Wait, Jerry Jones is strapped like that?
Yeah, you can put Condoleezza in charge. She's not going to change the outcome of a team being run by Jerry Jones.
What about a nuclear weapons program?
Run by Jerry Jones?
Yeah.
I mean, give
We've
it.
got to arm the moderate Cowboys fans.
Yeah. I don't know. Give it another week of discourse. I might be in favor of it. Speaking of the info environment, AI is allegedly making us dumb, but probably not. So, Ed, what do you got?
I mean, we're making ourselves dumb, aren't we? But no, so there's this paper that came out. It's an MIT paper, Your Brain on ChatGPT, Accumulation of Cognitive Debt When Using an AI Assistant for Essay Writing Task. Oddly enough, not plural. Yeah, so this paper has been covered by everyone on the internet saying that it makes you stupid. And it's not what it says, right? Like, it's saying that it increases cognitive debt in the sense that if you use an LLM to perform parts of a task, you don't remember those parts of the task as much. Which, yeah, that makes sense. If I delegated a task to a coworker, I would expect to not know what the coworker did either. And that's a weird situation to be in when the coworker is as spotty as ChatGPT is, but like, yeah, and?
I think we've just reinvented the Peter principle from First Principles.
A self-petering.
You're not wrong. And I hate it. But yeah, I mean, like that's honestly a good call, because that's definitely what I see a lot of, because for my sins, I spend a lot of time dealing with these tools in my day job, and it's very bimodal, right? And George, I know you've poked with a lot of these things as well. But like, you see a lot of people who have no theory of mind for how the thing works, and then they just punch something in and they go, well, that must be right. The computer said so. And you see this even in like non-LLM contexts, right? Like, if I go tell somebody don't do that, they yell at me. If I said the computer said don't do that, they go, oh, okay. And then they go do the other thing. And it's just sort of the way we've coached a lot of people into acting and just treating these things as an authority when they shouldn't be. For
elder millennials out there, I can remember a time when anything you got on the internet had to be treated in very suspect terms. Anything on Wikipedia was assumed to be wrong. But if you went to an encyclopedia that was edited by somebody sitting in a dank room in London, then it was fine. I mean, it's the truth. It's in the encyclopedia. Nowadays, very much the opposite, right? Very much.
This goes to my observation that Americans will believe anything if you sell it to them with a British accent.
There's always been a little bit of a disconnect for me on this with people taking output from LLMs, because my first impulse when I see that is to edit it. It's to go through and say, okay, this part is wrong. This part is poorly written. This part needs to move around here. And, you kind of ship of Theseus your way through the thing, and you wind up with an end product that ideally is a synthesis between whatever the LLM spat out and whatever you want it to look like. And I think that I think these are useful tools in that way, that they can kind of throw up a scaffolding that has fairly solid formatting and some principles of layout that are useful, that you can then punch up yourself. A thing that I'm learning, that I think a lot of us are learning together, is that lots of people don't do that with LLM output. That you kind of you take the first answer and you go, oh yeah, that looks good. That's probably it. And that's the end of the process. There's no iteration. There's no back and forth. There's no final cut back in the human hands. And those are very different ways of approaching the tool.
But that's also not like new in itself either, right? Because what did people do before this? They went and copy pasted Wikipedia into their term papers, right? It's not really a different thing. And I actually I find that you can get extremely good results, but you have to know how, and that's the hard part. And no one's really teaching anyone how, because I don't think anyone really understands it at a level that's really reproducible at this point. It's all kind of like, well, this works for me. If I ever give a box of prompts to a coworker or somebody who does know how these things work, it rarely works because they're kind of wrapped around how I approach a problem. And I do think there's a set of principles that we could be teaching around things that are like, we see very often that you're trying to go from a state of high information, low entropy, you're trying to a smaller amount of output data, which means you have to put stuff in, right? It's the don't trust the training set type of thing. And if you do that, if you give it a bunch of orienting materials, and if you ask focused questions and ask for focused outputs based on those materials, the hit rate goes to 99+%. Whereas if you're just asking it these questions, a lot of it just sort of naively just pulls from the training set, which is really just kind of that's where you get into the fancy autocomplete stuff. And the lack of understanding of how those tools work and the lack of understanding of how you can leverage them is, one, endemic, I think, at this point. I don't know if we're going to fix that. But two, it's really aided and abetted by the vendors, because at minimum, you could just turn on a web search for most of this stuff. But they don't, because web searches cost money. And the free tiers are loss leaders at best. So you get a bunch of people who are just throwing together something completely out to lunch. When if you just click the checkbox and run the same thing again, you get a markedly better output. And it's just really weird that we're sitting here for that. Also, don't use ChatGPT. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
The thing that really I've used LLMs for is writing code, and I don't write code for my day job. So there is no real reason that I should be dedicating huge amounts of time to understanding how Python works at a granular level. I can write some Python code. I've got a process I use that I converted from Excel to Python a few years ago that I wrote it was just before the LLMs came out. So great investment on my part to spend dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of hours writing a 3,000 line Python file, Python pandas, to convert a raw micro data set into a finished aggregated output that I could drop into Excel and have charts update. There is no reason for me to be spending a bunch of time on that particular task. But here's why LLMs are great for this kind of thing. I had a very specific input that's very comprehensible. I had a very specific output. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I would be able to validate whatever the output was in a very straightforward way. How I get from input to output is really not important. If the code runs, it's good. It's just that simple. And my code runs that I wrote myself. If I had used ChatGPT or Claude or whatever to write this code, it would have taken me an hour. Instead, I spent dozens of hours, and I didn't really retain most of the stuff I learned because A, I was bad at it. B, it's not what I'm going to be doing most of my time anyways. So now when I have a coding problem, I go to ChatGPT or Claude. I use Claude actually for almost all these. I'll go to Claude and say, here's what I want. I want it in this language. I have this input data. I want this output data. And then I run the code and I validate. you can't just take it naively. But if you can find a problem where you have a limited set of tools you want to use, a limited information space, a limited sort of horizon for it, and then you can actually validate that what it's putting out is useful, it's going to save you an enormous amount of time. Just in the same way that typing something into Google is a heck of a lot faster than going down to your local library and rifling through index cards. And that's not a criticism of the library at all. It's just a fact that Google's going to be faster and get you there, even if it's slightly inferior from an epistemological perspective.
I think one of the problems with the way LLMs present is that LLM output looks like it's finished product. It's well formatted. If you were getting that format, that quality of presentation from a coworker, you would assume that it's the final link in the chain or near the final link in the chain. This isn't, the stage where you're still workshopping the idea and tossing things back and forth. It looks like the final cut. It's not the final cut. Many of the good use cases for LLMs are where you're doing something that is an intermediate product, where you're asking it to write you a coding widget that is part of a larger project that you have more comprehensive oversight over. You're asking it to draft something that you're then going to alter. You're asking it to put out, some kind of a storyboard project if you're doing video, where you can describe something verbally and then pass that off to the people who do the graphics professionally. Once the dream machine has spat out something that looks directionally kind of like what you wanted, so that it's easier to reach a meeting of the minds rather than you trying to do that same process directly to the artist. I think it's easy to get away from that. I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that these are largely intermediate products rather than final products.
I think that is an artifact of workflow, though. I really do. To give an example that I've used before on Blue Sky, we have a lot of APIs, software APIs at my day job, and nobody writes documentation. I have at this point built out a system that writes documentation I would comfortably say is like median quality compared to most folks on the internet. If you took this and then you look next to the representative sample, this is punching above its weight, and it takes about 5 hours of a human's time as opposed to 50 plus. But the final output is predominantly what the LLM came up with, and it's because of how you put the data in. What you're describing, I think, Propter, ends up being what happens if you let the LLM drive. And the rule has to be never let it drive, right? Like the rule has to be, this is the information I'm giving you, act on it, as opposed to come up with something from somewhere. And that's a little better when you're using a web search because it's not actually pulling it from the training set, it's pulling it from a web search. But what most people are doing is what you just described. And I think that you're right. It does create things that have the affordances of being a finished work. Like it likes writing prose. One way to combat this is to have it write bullets, for example. But if you're acting on things you put into it, the results can absolutely be really, really good. The trick is that most people don't necessarily, one, fully understand why that's the case. I keep meaning to do a little bit more to explain that. But on top of that, people are also just not, let's be honest, most people don't know what they're asking the thing. They don't have a definition of done because they don't have a definition of what the thing is. And that's kind of where we keep getting trapped because people just treat these things as oracles, and treating oracles as true has historically gone very poorly.
What you're saying is basically you should treat it like a Tesla. It's probably not going to crash and burn and destroy you if you drive it around town yourself. But if you give it over to the machine, it will definitely do that.
That's the most tortured analogy I've ever heard.
Hey, it's my specialty, baby.
I mean, basically, you have to...
Autopilot is really scary.
You have to put your BA hat on, right? You have to be a business analyst. a program manager kind of, many people who listen to us probably have similar jobs to that. That's what I do for a living, along with some average ass SAS and SQL programming.
Living in the Jira mines.
That's our episode for the week. For Normal Men, I'm George in Charlotte.
I'm low-tax speedrun enjoyer in outer Florida.
I'm Proctor in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Ed in scenic Boston, Massachusetts.
Before we let you go, we have one quick plug. We here at Normal Men are extremely big fans of Pride, and I'm a big fan of Charlotte FC. So I'd love for you to join me and other Charlotte FC supporters as we raise money for Time Out Youth, a Charlotte space for LGBTQ plus youth. Our Pride Raiser works by pledging a donation tied to the number of goals Charlotte FC scores in June. We are terrible on the road and have no home games in June, so pledge big. Please visit perk.es, that's peark.es/Pride Raiser to pledge.